On a quiet summer evening in 1977, the small coastal town of Cypress Bay was bathed in a golden glow. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the empty streets. Officer Laura Benson, just 26 years old, stepped out of the police station for her night patrol. She had been with the force for only 3 years, but she was already well known in the community. People respected her kindness and admired her bravery. With her crisp uniform and calm smile, Laura was the kind of officer who made people feel safe. That night, she drove her police cruiser through the town, checking in on familiar spots. She waved at the owner of the corner diner, nodded to a group of teenagers at the arcade, and paused at the old lighthouse to make a note in her logbook. Everything seemed normal, just another routine patrol. But no one knew that this would be the last time anyone would see Officer Laura Benson. Around 9:30 p.m., Laura reported on the radio that she was heading down Route 8, a narrow road that ran along the ocean cliffs. Her voice was calm as always. Nothing unusual, just heading to check out the beach access road. "I'll update in 10 minutes, she had said. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. Dispatch tried to reach her, but there was no response. Other officers were sent to search the area, but they found nothing. No sign of Laura, no sign of her patrol car. It was like she had simply vanished into the night. Panic spread through the town. Everyone knew Laura, and the idea that something bad had happened to her didn't make sense. Search teams scoured the cliffs, the forest, and the nearby roads for days. Helicopters flew overhead. Divers searched the waters below. But still nothing. No evidence. No clues. No answers. Laura's parents were heartbroken. Her father, a retired firefighter, refused to believe she was gone. He kept a light on in her childhood bedroom every night, just in case she came home. Her mother often sat by the window, watching the street in silence. The police department held a service for her after 2 weeks, but without a body or a clear explanation, it felt incomplete. Rumors began to spread. Some believed she had been taken. Others thought she might have driven off the cliff accidentally. A few even said she had run away, though no one who knew Laura believed that. She loved her job and her town too much. But as time went on and no new leads came in, the case went cold. Years passed. New officers joined the force. New families moved into town. The memory of Officer Laura Benson faded from the front pages, but never from the hearts of those who had known her. Her picture remained on the wall of the station, right by the entrance, smiling proudly in her uniform. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, a small group of townspeople gathered at the cliffside to leave flowers and say a few words. Her father never stopped searching. Even as he grew older and weaker, he kept a box of her case files beside his chair. He would often say, "One day we'll know the truth. I just hope I'm still around to see it." The mystery of Laura's disappearance became a part of the town's history. Students learned about it in local history classes. Tourists sometimes asked about the story when they passed through, but no one had any answers. For 13 long years, the ocean held its secret, and the cliffs stood silent. Then, in the summer of 1990, something finally changed. A hiker exploring a rarely traveled path along the edge of the cliff slipped and nearly fell. When he looked down to steady himself, he saw something strange sticking out from the rocks far below. What he saw would reopen a case that had haunted the town for over a decade. The hiker's name was Mark Leland, a man in his early 30s who had moved to Cypress Bay just a year earlier. He had always loved nature and spent his weekends exploring different trails. That particular Sunday afternoon, the skies were clear and the breeze was calm, making it perfect for a long hike. Mark decided to take a detour off the main trail near the ocean cliffs. It was a path that was barely used, overgrown with wild grass and scattered rocks. As he climbed over a jagged ledge to get a better view of the sea, his foot slipped on some loose gravel. He managed to catch himself on a bush before tumbling over the side, but his heart raced as he realized how close he had come to falling. While catching his breath, he looked down the steep cliff face, and that's when he noticed something strange among the rocks below. There, resting at a dangerous angle, was what looked like the rusted frame of an old vehicle. It was hard to tell from above, but the shape was unmistakable. A car, battered and nearly swallowed by the sea. Mark squinted to get a better look and noticed something faint but chilling on the side. Faded white letters spell out the word police. His stomach dropped. He had heard the story of the female officer who had gone missing all those years ago. Could this be her car? Mark quickly climbed back to safer ground and used his cell phone to call the police. He gave them the coordinates and described what he had seen. The officer on the line was quiet for a moment before saying, "We'll send a team right away." Within an hour, police vehicles, rescue teams, and even a few reporters had arrived at the scene. The path to the spot Mark had found was difficult, so the recovery team had to bring in climbing gear and ropes to reach the lower rocks. As they got closer, their doubts slowly faded. It was indeed a police vehicle, a model that hadn't been used in over a decade. The body of the car was twisted and covered in rust. The ocean waves had washed over for years, hiding it well. But what struck everyone the most was that the driver's door was still shut, and a badge was found tangled in a patch of seaweed nearby. The badge number matched that of Officer Laura Benson. News of the discovery spread fast. Reporters from across the state arrived to cover the story that had remained a mystery for 13 long years. Former officers who had worked with Laura came out of retirement to help with the investigation. The police chief at the time, now gray-haired and walking with a cane, came to see the site himself. He looked down at the wreck with tears in his eyes and said, "She was one of our best. We never stopped wondering what happened to her." Divers were called in to search the area below the cliff, while forensic experts examined the car for any signs of what might have caused the fall. Some parts of the vehicle had broken away, but the steering wheel, dashboard, and even a cracked police radio were still intact. The discovery also brought Laura's family back into the spotlight. Her parents, now elderly and living in a quiet neighborhood outside of town, were contacted by the police. Her father's hands trembled as he held the badge that had once rested on his daughter's chest. He looked up at the detective and whispered, "I knew she didn't leave. She never would." For years he had prayed for this moment, but now that it had come, it was both a relief and a heartbreak. The recovery of the car brought answers, but it also reopened old wounds. The question on everyone's mind was still unanswered. How did the car end up there, and what had really happened that night in 1977? The investigation that followed the discovery of the patrol car was unlike anything Cypress Bay had seen in years. The entire town seemed to pause as police tapes surrounded the cliffside, and detectives worked day and night to uncover the truth. Laura's old case file was reopened, and new evidence was collected from the rusted wreck. Forensic specialists worked carefully, aware that the ocean had taken its toll over the years. Still, they were able to recover small but important details. Inside the vehicle, beneath a layer of sand and sea debris, they found Laura's nameplate, a few faded pages of her patrol log, and the melted remains of a flashlight. The passenger seat had been twisted and torn, possibly from the impact, but there were no signs of a second person. What stood out the most, though, was the condition of the brakes. They had been tampered with. The brake line showed signs of being cut, not by natural wear or corrosion, but with a sharp tool. Investigators knew immediately that this wasn't just an accident. Laura's patrol car had not simply gone off the cliff because of a mistake. Someone had made sure it would. This new piece of evidence turned the case from a cold disappearance into an active homicide investigation. The town was in shock. People who had long believed it was a tragic accident now whispered about betrayal, danger, and secrets that had been buried for over a decade. The question shifted from where did she go to who wanted her gone? Detectives began to re-examine Laura's last days on duty. They pulled out her old reports, reviewed her assignments, and even interviewed former colleagues who had worked with her in 1977. It turned out that in the months leading up to her disappearance, Laura had been investigating something quietly. She hadn't officially filed reports about it, but she had made personal notes, which were now pieced together from scraps found in her locker and from old journal entries her parents kept. Laura had suspected that someone inside the police department was involved in illegal activities, specifically a drug operation running through the docks. She had kept her suspicions quiet, only telling one trusted officer, a man named Jim Warner, who had since retired and moved out of state. Detectives tracked Jim down and visited him at his home in Arizona. At first, he was hesitant to talk, but after hearing about the car's discovery, his voice grew heavy with emotion. He explained that Laura had come to him in confidence, afraid to report her suspicions through official channels. She believed that someone high up in the department might be involved and didn't know who to trust. Jim admitted that he had warned her to be careful and had offered to help her gather more information, but days later, she disappeared. For years, he had carried the guilt of not doing more. Now, with the car found and evidence of foul play clear, he hoped justice could finally be served. The detectives returned to Cypress Bay with a new list of names, officers and dock workers who had been active in 1977 and had possible links to the case. Some of them had left town, some had died, but a few still lived nearby. Interviews began again. People were older now, but memories, especially the dark ones, had a way of staying sharp. One former officer, now in his 70s, grew visibly nervous during questioning. He had once been Laura's supervisor and had dismissed her concerns about the docks back in the day. When asked if he had ever heard her mention brake problems or feeling watched, he hesitated, then said, "She might have, but I didn't think much of it at the time." His body language told a different story. The case began to feel like peeling back layers of a long-forgotten wound. Secrets were slowly being brought into the light. The town watched closely, holding their breath. Many had lived with a mystery for so long they couldn't believe the truth might finally come out. For Laura's family, every development brought both hope and fear. Hope that justice might be near, and fear that the truth could be darker than anyone imagined. One thing was now clear. Laura Benson hadn't simply driven off a cliff. She had been silenced. But by who and why was a final mystery the town still had to face. The final part of the investigation brought emotions to a boiling point in Cypress Bay. After all the years of silence, people wanted answers, real ones. The detectives focused on the remaining suspects, especially those still in town who had worked with Laura or been connected to the docks. One man in particular stood out, Raymond Carter, a former sergeant who had retired just 2 years after Laura's disappearance. At the time, he had been in charge of patrol assignments and often gave Laura her nightly routes. Over the years, rumors had surfaced about his ties to questionable businesses near the waterfront, but nothing had ever been proven. Now, with evidence that Laura's brakes had been cut and her interest in dockside corruption becoming clearer, Raymond became the primary person of interest. Police interviewed him at his home, and though polite, he was guarded. He denied any involvement in Laura's disappearance, claiming he had always respected her. She was a bright light, he said, the kind of cop this town needed. But when pressed about Laura's suspicions in 1977, he became defensive. "She didn't tell me anything about that," he snapped. "If she had, I would have done something." Still, investigators weren't convinced. They obtained a warrant and searched his old garage and storage unit. In a dusty box buried under tools and fishing gear, they found something chilling, a torn notebook that once belonged to Laura Benson. Her name was faintly written on the back cover. Inside were pages of observations and names, including Carter's. The handwriting was messy but readable. Laura had clearly been documenting people she believed were involved in illegal activity at the docks, and she had circled Carter's name multiple times. The notebook had clearly been hidden for years, possibly taken from her car before it went over the cliff. When confronted with this evidence, Carter's calm demeanor cracked. He claimed he had found a notebook in a drawer at the station after Laura vanished and kept it out of fear that he'd be blamed. "I didn't hurt her," he insisted. "I just didn't want my name dragged into something I had nothing to do with." But his story didn't hold up. He had lied about never hearing her concerns. Combined with the brake tampering and other circumstantial evidence, the police had enough to bring him in for further questioning. During the next round of interrogation, Carter broke. His voice trembled as he spoke about the past, the pressure, the fear. He admitted that back in 1977, he had been approached by a group of men working at the docks who were involved in smuggling drugs through fishing boats. At first, he turned a blind eye, but then they offered him money, and he started helping them by steering patrols away from the harbor during key nights. When Laura began asking questions and getting too close, he panicked. She hadn't accused him directly, but he feared she would. One night, While her cruiser was parked outside the station before her shift, he slipped under it and cut the brake line. "I thought maybe it would scare her," he whispered. "I didn't think she'd die." The guilt had eaten at him ever since, but he had never confessed until now. News of the confession spread quickly. The town was stunned, and many people gathered at the cliffs to pay their respects once again. The police held a formal press conference where they shared the details and confirmed that justice would be pursued. Carter was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, tamper with evidence, and obstruction of justice. Though many believed the punishment came far too late, there was some relief in finally knowing what had happened. Laura Benson's parents, now in their 80s, were present at the courthouse. Her mother held a photo of Laura in her uniform, tears falling silently. Her father, once a strong and stubborn man, stood beside her and said, "She didn't disappear. She was taken from us. But now, she's finally come home." The police department gave Laura a full honor ceremony. Officers from across the state attended. Her badge number was officially retired, and a small memorial was placed near the spot where her car had been found. People brought flowers, candles, and notes. Some came just to say thank you. The town that had once whispered about the mystery of her disappearance now spoke proudly of her courage. In the end, Laura Benson was remembered not as a victim, but as a hero who tried to do the right thing in a world where silence was easier. Her story had been hidden by the sea for 13 years, but the truth had finally risen with the tide.